Hi there, people. Today we're going over Lincoln Child's novel, Utopia. This one's a real doozy, so strap in tight and don't stick your head out until the ride has come to a complete stop, because we're about to go flipping deep into this fictional amusement park right here in Lincoln Child's Utopia.
A thrill a minute, neck twisters, spine shakers. Rides like this are a lot of fun, once in a while, and for some people.
So I got this at the thrift store, really only because the cover caught my eye. I probably wouldn't have even noticed it, but I'm like, Utopia. Sounds like an interesting enough title. Now that I really look at the cover, it's nothing that special. It's just a blurry photo of some people on a roller coaster. And it's not even a roller coaster that's in the book, so I don't even know what this photo is supposed to represent or anything, but who knows. This book, I have mixed feelings about this book. In some ways, it's imaginative and creative and shows everything I'd like to see in an up-and-coming author, and in other ways it really fails, like in a literary aspect. I should probably start by introducing you to the book's premise. The premise is, what if there was an amusement park, but it was a really fancy amusement park, and it was super cool? That's the premise. So obviously not that complex a premise, and I don't think Lincoln Child uses his imagination to its full potential, because clearly he is trying to construct some kind of demented wonderland here, and if he really tried, he could probably really do it, but I just don't feel like he gives his all in this book. He really just does not put in the full effort. Now, Lincoln Child is most well known for working with another author, Douglas Preston, and they're behind a book called Relic. I've never read it, but maybe when they work together, their books are incredible, because I hear great things about Relic. It has a full Wikipedia page. This book has a Wikipedia page that is what they call in the Wikipedia business a stub. It's like really short and has almost nothing to say about the book. Definitely no reception. I don't even know how people feel about this book. I didn't even know this book existed. Okay, so I should start by giving a general overview of the characters and the setting. Utopia is split up into 4 worlds, which were designed by the late magician/cartoon showrunner Eric Nightingale shortly before his death. We have Gaslight, which is designed after Victorian London. We have Callisto, which is modeled to look like a space station outside of Jupiter. We have the Boardwalk, which is supposed to look like a turn-of-the-century type seaside amusement park / I guess just seashore in the general 1900s, 1910s, turn-of-the-century type era. And of course we have Camelot, which is a fantasy world that's like dragons and stuff. And that's essentially what there is in this here. So the book starts out with this helpful little map of Utopia, which I assume is supposed to be just like the map that you'd get as you enter the amusement park. Anyway, Eric Nightingale has a prodigy in robotics. His name is Dr. Andrew Warren. Andrew Warren has a daughter named Georgia. She's basically used like a prop. And then Andrew Warren is also having relationship issues with the chief of operations of the park, Sarah Boatwright. In addition to this, there's Freddy Barksdale, who's the, I forget what his title is. There's a lot of bureaucracy and boring technocratic stuff in this, but Freddy Barksdale is there. He's British. And then there's Terry Bonifacio, who's the only ethnic character on the good side anyway. She's a Filipino, and she's a robotics technician. And so basically that's the main cast. There's some other side characters. On the evil side, you got John Doe, and then you got Cracker Jack and Hardball and and what's the other one? Candyman, and all these horrible, good-for-nothing, awful, bad, horrible criminals that just have. We never learn what any of their real names are. They're never developed beyond that. I guess Cracker Jack is, at one point, the author describes his features as South American, and then a couple paragraphs later he says his features are Mayan, even though Mayans are in Central America. I don't think he understands the difference, honestly. And we learn about Hardball that he has almond-shaped eyes. Nothing beyond that, no character development. And then they're led by this evil mustache-twirling gent named John Doe, which, might I add, is a really stupid name if you're the head of a criminal organization. You could call yourself the Intimidator or Mr. Malice, but you choose John Doe, the name they give to unidentified corpses. Yes, that certainly is an intimidating name, John Doe. I think maybe Lincoln Child just couldn't come up with a better name than that for the leader of this horrible band of rascals. There's also Water Buffalo. You never learn what he looks like or who he is, really. All we know is that he has an affinity for Proust. In that regard, I guess he's kind of the archetype of the surprisingly smart, big-muscled doofus. Oh yeah, and we also have, on the good side, we got Angus Poole, who's introduced about halfway through the book, once all the other main characters have been introduced, and you're like, why wasn't this guy introduced earlier? Because he ends up being really important in the plot, but then, this novel kind of suffers from a lack of pacing, which is ironic, given that it's, instead of chapters, it has like these little time-coded little sections that are like 5 pages long at the most, and you get the entire day at Utopia section from like 7:30 a.m. to like 4:30 p.m. And the pacing just isn't that good, and also the characters are never described like in a way that makes me remember how they look. In a novel, you don't have to describe what everyone's wearing or anything. You just need to, get their mannerisms down, make me think, oh, this is how this character looks and behaves, or this is something this character could generally be compared to. And that's enough to make me understand how a character looks. But Lincoln Child just does not have that knack. I don't know how Andrew Warren looks. I don't really know how Sarah Boatwright looks. I don't know any of it beyond just that I don't even know what Andrew Warren's hair color is. And in a novel where there aren't any pictures, it's kind of important to describe your characters in a vivid way so that as you read the novel you can think, oh yes, I can imagine this. But the characters in this book have such piss poor motivation going on, and like nothing about them is described, like from their habits to their affinities to their dislikes, that I don't even remember how any of them really are. And I just finished this book like half an hour ago, so that should say how forgettable this book is overall. Another thing which I think should be mentioned is that in one of the quotes praising this book, they compare it to Michael Crichton's Westworld and Jurassic Park. But I don't think that comparison is apt, because both Westworld and Jurassic Park are about the dangers of rampant consumerism. And you know how when you make a giant theme park, it can be kind of fun, but things can go wrong, because there's always human error involved. Jurassic Park, obviously, is a good example of this sort of thing. There are dinosaurs in the plot, but they're not the villains. The villain is the Colonel Sanders guy, who builds this giant dinosaur park and brings children to it, and then, the dinosaurs break out. But it's not their fault, it's his fault, because he made them. So that's kind of how Jurassic Park is, it's about the humans being, greedy for profit and overlooking basic safety elements. And, that's what makes Michael Crichton's books, Westworld and Jurassic Park, good, because they talk about how, this kind of thing is really unsustainable, building giant theme parks and everything. And, if you build giant theme parks with robots, they might rebel and they might not want to be mistreated anymore, and they might have artificial intelligence. And it needs to also be remembered that Westworld was written back in 1970, and back then the idea of an amusement park stocked up with robots was pretty new. And this was written in like 2002, when the idea of an amusement park with some kind of robotics or some kind of mechanical element was nothing new. And this book does nothing with that. This book is not about the dangers of capitalism or the dangers of consumerism or the dangers of running a giant amusement park. This book essentially takes a piss all over Westworld and Jurassic Park by implying that the only way a massive amusement park on the likes of Utopia, which is like miles wide and covered by this massive geodesic dome and staffed by like thousands of employees, that the only way it could fail is if a ruthless group of criminals, the bad guys, started infiltrating the park and messing up the perfection that is Utopia. I think by calling his amusement park Utopia, Mr. Child is trying to make some kind of philosophical statement about how Utopia is inaccessible or unattainable or something, but it really doesn't come through. Or maybe he really is just naive enough to think that an amusement park called Utopia would just be perfect and nothing would be wrong, and Utopia is going to be the most awesome fucking amusement park under the sun, baby. It's going to be so fucking fun. And there's just no meat. There's no social commentary to be had, because Utopia is good and perfect, and the only thing messing it up is these disgusting, horrible criminals. At one point, they're literally just referred to as bad men or dangerous men, and they just are the most cartoonish, like, Snidely Whiplash frickin' villains I think I've ever seen in a book. They are the embodiment of a walking cliche. This John Doe guy literally has a goatee and two eyes that are different colors, and that's essentially all that's described about him. We don't know much else about how he looks, or we never even learn who he is, even though that might make for an interesting twist. We might learn who he is, but no, that we never learn who he is, because who cares? He's just John Doe. He's just some random anonymous criminal who's the problem, the conflict, the inciting incident. Makes no sense.
These are only a few of the devices that man has invented to give himself a thrill and a pain in the neck.
Another point that should be brought up is that this is a very technical book. It's not really science fiction, but it is a techno-thriller. It is really science fiction because it was published in 2002, and we learned that it's about a year after 2003, because at one point they go up to a spot called Nightingale's Nest, named after the park's creator, Eric Nightingale, and it says his date of death is 2003, and this is about a year after he dies, so we're talking 2004, and I just have to think, why not set it around 2010 or something, because that would kind of, be at least reasonably far enough into the near future that holograms could potentially be possible, or advanced robotics could at least be potentially possible. There aren't holograms in 2002, so I don't know why Mr. Child thinks there's going to be all these advanced holograms in just 2004. That'd be like if I said there's going to be a cure for cancer in like 2023. Like, sure, it'd be nice and all, but science probably isn't going to progress that fast. Just given the rate science is progressing now, probably won't progress that fast. So this is set in like 2004. So it's mainly a techno-thriller, and there's a lot of technical hacking / coding language in here. I'm sure all of it is accurate. I'm sure Mr. Child did his research okay. The problem is that none of it is especially interesting, and he uses a lot of terms that now in 2021 are pretty normal, and I understand them, and I'm not even technically minded. Like, he talks about black hat and white hat hackers and Trojan horses, and it's like, okay, I get all this stuff. I'm sure this was groundbreaking back in 2002, but, you know, I get it. So, on a technical level, yes, this is, I guess you could call it a techno-thriller, but it is severely undermined by Mr. Child's inability to craft an engaging world. We're talking a giant amusement park with 4 sections, each of which sounds pretty cool, and his description of everything is so technical. He just uses all these adjectives. There's no creative language, there's no abstraction. Everything is mind-numbingly, like, it's like reading a technical manual. I think he just doesn't understand how to make a place sound interesting. Here's a good example. So there's a point where one of the park employees is, let me see. All right, here we go. Just listen to this passage here. He reached into his blazer pocket, fished out the plastic cards, and held them up, fanning them like a hand of playing cards. Any author will tell you that repeating the same word twice in a sentence, especially if you're making a comparison, is bad form because you want to demonstrate to the reader that you have a pretty good vocabulary. So saying that you can fan plastic cards like playing cards is nothing new to the reader. I think everyone knows that you can fan any kind of cards like playing cards. So he could have said he fanned the plastic cards like he was the best dealer in Reno, or he fanned the cards like he was about to deal a 21 in blackjack. But Mr. Child doesn't think of witty phrases like that keep the reader engaged and, you know, thinking about this stuff. He just is like, oh, he fanned the plastic cards like they were a hand of playing cards. And it's like, I know what the act of fanning entails. Make it interesting. The world building is really, really bad. So as I said, the park is based on this magician slash TV entertainer, Eric Nightingale. We never learn anything about him except that he's a magician, and he was so cool. And here the park opened after his death, so his vision is kind of warped. But we don't dwell too long on that because we want to emphasize just how cool Utopia is and how perfect it is, and to point out that the guy who invented it, that his vision, you know, has been distorted and corrupted. That we don't want to dwell too far on that. The amusement park is split into Camelot, Boardwalk, and Callisto, and it's established that Mr. Nightingale is the owner of 2 very successful children's properties, Atmosphere and the Feverstone Chronicles, neither of which, of course, are real shows that actually exist. Another reason why this should be set in 2010 instead of just 2004. That would explain how Eric Nightingale got so popular, because, say, he started these shows after this book's publication somewhat, and then they got popular. But as it is in 2004, it's like, how did this guy come out of nowhere with these 2 shows in only 2 years, or no, only in 1 year, and manage to become the biggest sensation on the planet? Also, Disney is mentioned once in here, so we know Disney and Disneyland exists in this world. So to think that this weird magician and his 2 properties could outdo Disney is just not, it doesn't sound like something that would be possible. And this is further worsened by the fact that Mr. Child doesn't seem to understand how amusement parks make a lot of their money. For instance, he mentions that everyone who goes to Utopia gets a $75 admission fee. From birth until you're 80, you get a $75 admission fee. And this just isn't good business, because if you want to make a lot of money, you present people with the illusion of a good discount. This is what Disneyland does with all the family bundles and all the weekend getaway bundles and all the vacation bundles. They make it seem cheaper. If you just charge a $75 flat rate to everybody, the illusion of a good savings is diminished. And given that the park is based off properties created by a literal magician, you'd think they'd be a little better at, illusion. But Utopia is horrendously blunt. They don't offer overnight lodging, and we're talking an amusement park that's located a couple miles north of Las Vegas. So if you want to go to Utopia for a second day, which you probably will have to because it's giant and composed of 4 different sections, you have to drive back to Las Vegas and then come back the next day and pay $75 for everyone all over again. I really don't think this sounds like a sustainable business model because, again, Disneyland makes its big money because it has the Disneyland Hotel, and it says you can stay right here on site and spend as much money as you want, and you don't ever have to leave. Just pay us every single night at the Disneyland Hotel and you can stay here on site instead of heading back to Las Vegas. You think you're going to get any repeat business by not offering a hotel? It's established that there is a hotel for like VIPs and celebrities, but guess what? Normal people have obscene amounts of money too more often than not, and you can milk that. So that just makes no sense. Utopia uses advanced robotics and holographic technology, and it would go bankrupt in like a month unless it offered a hotel to its guests. I can say that right now. It would not win out. Another problem with Mr. Child's world building is that all 4 of the worlds are just kind of really lame. Like, for instance, we barely see any of Camelot in the book. Like, barely any. We see one scene at the Battle of Griffin Tower, whatever that is, and then that's it. You got the boardwalk, which, as I said, is based off an old-fashioned type 1900s amusement park / fun strip / seaside thing. Then you got Callisto, which is outer space, which is kind of cool. And then you got Gaslight, which is the section I just don't get, because we're talking America and we're talking the middle of Nevada. You think all these Nevadans are going to be interested in Victorian era London? Also, when I think of fun destinations, Fantasyland pops up and Outer Spaceland pops up, but Victorian-era London doesn't exactly, because, we're talking Victorian-era London. That wasn't a fun time to be alive, and there's even an attraction here called the Birmingham Coal Company. What's that attraction? You just go in and your lungs are filled with carcinogens? Yeah, real fun ride. I don't think anyone would go for that, especially in Nevada. We're talking Nevada here. I think it'd be much more accurate if Mr. Child put a cowboy-themed attraction instead of Gaslight, but then he'd be accused of ripping off Westworld, so he can't do that. Darn, it's too bad Michael Crichton did everything Child has done 30 years earlier. Gosh darn, what a wacky world we live in, huh? Some of these attractions are never seen, like Crab Nebula, or Big Dipper, or Spider Rockets. I don't think the Constellations or Afterburn are ever seen. The Flume, the All-New Review, the Roundup, Fenton Park, the Enchanted Carousel. We never see, like I said, in Camelot is the most underdeveloped. We never see the Wizard's Crown, the Hall of the Mountain King, the Refectory, Goblin's Dance, Scarborough Fair, Dragon's Spire. We don't see any of it. And this is a problem when you're trying to convey this immense amusement park with so much variety and so much fun. I'm not having fun because some of this stuff is never even brought up. And I want to know how it is, because we're talking a fun, amusement park here. A couple of these attractions are you're kind of made into cool set pieces, but really not enough to make me like, yeah, this is a good novel. I think if it was stretched out to like 800 pages, maybe you'd have more time to fit stuff in there, or if you just trimmed some of the fat. But quite honestly, again, I think Gaslight is a really awful, like, it just doesn't make any sense. Nobody would be going to that, because who's into, like, Victorian London? This quote on the back says, "Terrific. Child has created a fictional wonderland that is both high-tech and nostalgic." It's like, nostalgic for who? 130-year-olds? Who's nostalgic for Victorian London? Like if it was a 1950s land or something, maybe, but it's an 1870s land. I don't know if anyone's nostalgic for that. Also, it wouldn't be nostalgic even for someone from 1870, because Child doesn't know how to describe any of this in an interesting way. So that just falls apart. It's explained that some of the people who come to Gaslight are like historical scholars who are so amazed at how accurate this is and how good it looks. Oh my god, this is so accurate. But you also have, like, you know, Professor Cripplewood's Chamber of Fantastic Illusion, which is something that was not around in Victorian times. You know, it's not historically accurate, and you can't convince me that people are going to this place only for the historical accuracy. The problem mainly is that Child has to create his own properties from scratch and convince the audience that you really would be interested enough to visit them, and they all have to be based on public domain stuff. So you got like Sherlock Holmes land, and I like Sherlock Holmes as much as the next guy, don't get me wrong, but I don't exactly think you could build an entire amusement park around him. Another thing that Utopia seriously doesn't seem to understand is that the main way it's explained that the park makes its money is through casinos, which I don't think are allowed in amusement parks where you also have hundreds of kids roaming around, because then they'd get addicted to gambling. That's why normally casinos don't allow anyone under 21, because gambling's addictive. But I suppose here in Utopia they just have giant gambling casinos operating all the time, and that's how Utopia makes its money, even though they would be facing lawsuits up the ass for that. Like, they have a whole fun medieval land, and then in the middle you just have this giant casino, and, you know, some 6-year-old goes in there and becomes a chronic gambler, and he's going to sue Utopia up the ass, let me tell you.
But few of us would like to do very much traveling over the waves of a roller coaster.
You know, that just doesn't make any sense, and it's never explained or anything that these casinos are off limits to, like, literal children, so I'm just going to go with it and assume that they are, and that's just a really crappy business model. Like, Disneyland doesn't have casinos lying around everywhere, am I right? Anyway, the major conflict, like I said, is that this heinous group of thugs breaks into Utopia, and we're supposed to be like, oh my god, I can't believe this, and 2 entire rides blow up, and like 27 people die on one of them, or 20 something, I forget the exact number, but Utopia is not sued for all it's worth. It just chugs along fine, because apparently Mr. John Doe is such a cunning criminal that he's able to convince Sarah Boatwright, the chief of operations, that she should just keep the park running, and you know, nobody will get hurt, and all they want is her to deliver them a disc or something. I'm not gonna spoil it, because this book is kind of actually good with the twist, and there are a few points where this book actually kind of surprised me with the cat and mouse game that's going on here. But essentially, this, like, 27 people die on a ride, and this park just keeps on running, because I guess it's the most popular and awesome amusement park in the world. No lawsuits here. And it's explained that, like, these people would have a case, because, you know, they kept the park running even though there were terrorists around, and that's, I don't think, legal But I guess in Utopia, laws just don't apply. The laws of Nevada, the laws of the United States, the laws of the universe, the laws of gravity, they don't apply, because there's even an anti-gravity ride in here. Here's another point where Utopia just completely fails to understand how amusement parks work. They don't really put in that much effort. Like, for instance, they don't build entire holograms. That's too difficult. You know what the average ride in an amusement park is these days? You just sit in a seat, it moves around a little, and you're wearing a VR helmet. That's in Avatar Land at Disney World, Florida, and it looks like the shittiest ride I've ever seen. You don't even literally go up in the air, you don't actually drop or anything. It's just, you put on a VR helmet, you're on the back of an avatar dragon, and that's all she wrote. That's a bad ride, but it sure as heck saves an amusement park a lot of money, because they don't have to spend any money on, actual structures or actual, anything, and they can just put someone in a seat and program a bunch of fancy 3D renderings, and oh my gosh, I'm in Avatar, except wait, I'm not really in Avatar. They didn't even bother to build a fucking Avatar looking planet. They just have a garbage VR headset, and I'm sitting here. That's how the average amusement park ride is these days. But Utopia, since Mr. Child doesn't really understand how the business practice of these places goes, just assumes that they would waste an extravagant amount of money on all this detail and all this subtle, painstaking care. And I got news for you, Mr. Child. Amusement parks really don't put in that much effort. All they want is money. Big surprise. But Mr. Child is not smart enough to create a grounded, critique of capitalism. He doesn't even manage to make his park sound cool enough that all these people would visit it and go to it. And at one point he calls websites sites on the net, even though the World Wide Web and the internet are two separate things. I don't think he understands that, despite this being a techno thriller. Also, he doesn't predict any social media. Maybe if this book predicted social media all the way in 2002, a few years before the rise of Facebook, I might give it some credit, but it seems like the internet and Mr. Child's vision of the future is just it's just a bunch of hyperlinks and web pages and maybe a few blogs, but nothing more than that. And it just really doesn't make any sense. At one point, Andrew Warren's daughter is listening to an MP3 player, but he calls it a music player, maybe because he doesn't know what an MP3 file is. I don't know. Like, maybe he makes his main character this super advanced hacker, but he doesn't even know what an MP3 is. So that just kind of really doesn't make any sense. At the end, in the epilogue, we learn that Utopia is opening a new world, I guess just because they have infinite space, even though it's established pretty early on that the back of Utopia is just a giant concrete wall. So I guess they just move the concrete wall back a couple 100 feet and build an entirely new section called Atlantis, which is going to beat all the other water parks in the world, and it's going to be the most awesome water park on Earth, and everyone will just go to Utopia instead of all the other water parks in the world, because this is going to be the most awesome water park in existence. It's got a robotic serpent and everything, and for some reason the historical accuracy of this section is also touted, even though, surprise, Atlantis isn't a real place. Just another wacky detail in Utopia, because how can you make Atlantis historically accurate? So anyway, yeah, I think Mr. Child doesn't really understand the barrier to entry for a giant amusement park in the middle of the Nevadan desert, which is also going to have to compete with Las Vegas, which is just a couple miles below it, and is also, the world's biggest playground. So, I really don't think this lone amusement park operating a few miles north could really keep up business for that long. But the book explains it. It's like, yeah, they thought it wouldn't work, but against all odds it did. And it's like, Nah, this place would go bankrupt after like a month because, believe it or not, there's a very high barrier to entry in the amusement park game. Owning and operating and starting up an amusement park is not like owning or operating a hot dog business. It takes thousands of employees and tons of money. And how does this random magician have so much stinking money? And then it's explained that some random investor in New York is just pumping money into this. It just doesn't make any sense. Logistically, this place is absurd. It could not operate. I think maybe Mr. Child just gets so hung up on, oh man, my main character's a hacker, he's hacking the net, he's sleuthing the web, that he doesn't even start to think about how not everyone can build their own amusement park, and it's not going to be that successful even if you do manage to, because Disneyland exists. Like, there's only a couple big-time amusement parks, and you're not going to have thousands of people coming through your gates all the time if, you charge $75 across the board and don't even offer a child discount. You're not going to make as much money as your competitors, I'm sorry. But Child just seems to think that capitalism is magic. Nobody will ever get sued, even if 27 people die on your ride, even if your relative gets fried to a fucking crisp. Lawsuits don't happen, and this park is going to keep operating for years and years to come, because it's just that popular. Eric Nightingale's properties, the fucking Feverstone Chronicles and Atmosphere, which really sound pretty stupid. I don't think anyone would be into them, but then again, everyone's also into TikTok these days, so what do I know? I really don't think thousands of people would be into this, much less return after a day. They'd probably just head back to Las Vegas and go home. It's explained that some fellows are so dedicated to this park that they call themselves utopians, and they form entire web clubs about it. And oh yeah, I go to this park every day. I pay $75 a day. It's like, geez, money to burn, man. Probably the worst part of this book is Fred Barksdale, who is revealed to be the villain late in the book, and early on it's established that he's British and that he's kind of into Sarah Boatwright, and there's kind of a thing going on between them, and I'm like, yeah, this guy's the twist villain, because while the book is in third person, it every so often kind of goes into each character's head and gives a little bit about what they're thinking, and it goes into Andrew Warren's head, and it goes into Sarah Boatwright's head, and it goes into Georgia Warren's head, and it goes into Teresa Bonifacio's head, but it never goes into Fred Barksdale's head. So I'm like, okay, this guy's the bad guy. I can tell, because Child isn't giving us his inner monologue or inner motivations or anything. He's just a random British guy who's seducing the head of Utopia, the chief operations officer, Sarah Boatwright. So I'm just like, okay, yeah, it's him. And it is him. Spoilers if you care about this, but it's him. And I knew right off the bat. So that was the most obvious twist, and like, geez, that was a shitty twist, and I saw it coming. Like I said, there's some fantastic twists in this book, but none of them are about, none of the big twist about Freddy Barksdale being the rat doesn't surprise me at all. I expected it all along, because he's British, and I just knew Mr. Child would not, he'd be that cliche to have the British guy with the suave accent be the stinking, rotten villain, because honestly, we got another villain named Flipping John Doe, who has a goatee and a cane, so, I'm not exactly thinking this is going to be the most original read here. So that sucks. Another thing I'd say is that, like I said, this book is kind of racist, like how it says that the hacker character is both South American and Mayan, and Also, it has a weird point of just pointing out the other villains like almond-shaped eyes. And there is Teresa Bonifacio is Filipino, except the first time we meet her, she's just eating some like shrimp paste on mango, which is a pretty normal thing to eat, let's be honest. It sounds delicious. And Andrew Warren's daughter Georgia is like, ugh, you eat shrimp paste, and it's like, it's just shrimp, it's just ground up, it's not that bad. Like if she was eating eyeballs or something, I'd get it, but like, geez, that's not that weird a food. And for some reason it makes a point of pointing out that every Filipino is a Catholic. I don't get it. Mr. Child just doesn't seem to be that nuanced, which, you know, this is 2002, but I mean, still. It's also kind of sexist, because none of the female characters do that much, and then halfway through we get introduced to Angus Poole, who's this badass military operative, and he's or ex-military operative, and he's like, I'm gonna save your life, man, I'm gonna fucking be there for you. And then at one point he gets shot, and you think, oh my gosh, he's dead. Child actually did it. He killed off one of his main characters, who we've come to kind of identify with. But no, he lives. He gets shot like right above the heart, and he suffers massive blood loss. But yeah, he lives. And then the only sacrifice the main characters have to make is a robot dog named Wingnut. And that's the only sacrifice that has to be made. Not Mr. Poole. He's, you know, he lives because we can't kill any of our human characters. Just the robot one, alright? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. Brilliant. Yeah, you get shot in the fucking ribs and you live. Nice. That makes plenty of sense. So yeah, above all else, just not a very good book, but it is ambitious. I think Mr. Child just really thinks, what if I could make the most awesome amusement park imaginable? Westworld already has Medieval Land and Cowboy Land and Roman Land. It sounds like a theme park I'd go to. I probably wouldn't go to Utopia just because it has a branding problem, and it's also on the verge of bankruptcy because its choices are like really bad. Like in the casinos and not offering a hotel and like everything, it's destined for like failure. And I just can't see hundreds of thousands of people being this interested in a dragon attraction or an outer space attraction that's not based on any one recognizable character, unless we're counting Eric Nightingale's fake Atmosphere and Feverstone Chronicles, which we never even learn anything about. So the problem here is that on the one hand, Mr. Child wants to tell this exciting, rollicking amusement park fun story with a suspenseful, you know, element thrown in there. Like, it's not just an amusement park, it's also kind of scary because there's these criminals in it. But on the other hand, he really doesn't have that much of an imagination, and he's not good at giving details about the world, the characters, like anything that would interest the average reader.
Sudden ups and downs are all right in an amusement device.
Here's some of the quotes. I'll finish this review up with some of the quotes. A whiz-bang plot. Utopia springs to life from the opening pages. Child does an outstanding job of depicting the workings of his fantastic playground. That's true. He describes all the computer systems and all the laundry chutes, but he really doesn't make it, he doesn't describe the amusement park itself ever. Like, how it looks, how it feels, how's it like to be in this part of the amusement park. He's just like, this park is so-and-so many feet high, and it has so-and-so details on it that are specifically crafted by the engineers, and it has so-and-so many railings, and that's nice and all, but what's it like to be next to this ride? To want, you know, to be scared about going on, because it's so suspenseful, and it stops your heart, you know. He's just not very good at humanity, I guess. He doesn't infuse his writing with any humanity. And that's a problem, because you're trying to make us care about these characters, but they're all like wooden puppets, and none of them think for themselves, even remotely, and every line of dialogue is like the most cliché. Some other quotes. Startlingly inventive. A high-tech joyride. Child's characters are so interesting. Utopia will take its place beside two Michael Crichton classics, Westworld and Jurassic Park. That's from People, Page Turner of the Week. While this is a page turner, you can keep turning the pages. I did. I finished it pretty quick. It's a fun read. It's not going to take its place besides Westworld or Jurassic Park. Sorry. And also, I like how the quote just says, "Child's characters are so interesting." It sounds sarcastic. This sounds like a book that just randomly hit the New York Times list, and all these critics have got to be like, oh, we got to say something about it. It's on the New York Times bestseller list. What are we going to say? Here's another quote from the Kansas City Star. "What a great plot." That's all the Kansas City Star has to say about it. What a great plot. Have you ever heard a similar quote for that? Like any book, just, what a great plot. It sounds sarcastic. It sounds like the Kansas City Star is making fun of it, or they didn't have the time to read it, because that's the kind of quote I expect if, you want someone to say something nice about something, and they're like, what a great plot. It's very disingenuous. We got, "Child creates a convincingly self-contained world populated by amusing creations like a cyber dog called Wingnut and clever descriptions of futuristic amusement park rides. Child proves he is capable of fireworks." That is true. There are literal fireworks in here, but there are no literary fireworks. I don't read this and go, man, this guy's the next big talent. This guy is fucking brilliant. "The blend of technological jargon and suspense results in a real thrill-a-minute read," says Booklist. In fact, it doesn't. When I listen to computer programmers talk technological jargon for like 3 pages straight, it's not that interesting. The San Jose Mercury News says, "Utopia is an amazing place, and the lavish descriptions of its systems and operations are fun." That sounds like something you'd tell a toddler about his crayon drawing, not something you'd tell a best-selling author on the New York Times bestseller list. This novel, if nothing else, convinces me that the New York Times bestseller list really is just an elaborate sham, and you can land down here if you just write whatever, because not that many people are writing books these days. This is back in 2002, but not every book on the New York Times bestseller list is going to be that good. Like if you've co-written something with Douglas Preston and you're famous for one book, you'll probably get on the New York Times list again. That doesn't mean the book is good. None of the quotes are very reassuring, but the ending of this book is really fun, and I mean, it has a payoff. This book does follow Chekhov's gun. It introduces some characters early on who come in later, and like that. And overall, I just can't say I'm really mad at this book, because he seems like he's having such a fun time making up his own little amusement park and being like, I wish I could go on this ride, and it's kind of adorable. And I just kind of feel sorry for the guy, because this place isn't real, and it never will be real. It does sound like it could be fun if he could describe it in a fun and entertaining way that kept the reader engaged and interested, but he just doesn't seem to have the capacity to do that. And that's too bad. So I give this novel like a 3 out of 5, maybe a 6 out of 10. It's mediocre. It's not the worst thing I've ever read by any sense of the imagination, but it is not a good novel, and it's definitely not as good as like Westward or Jurassic Park, because while those books have something interesting to say about society, this book has nothing interesting to say about society. It's just a book about a cool amusement park and some evil, bad scoundrels invade it. Imagine if Jurassic Park was like that, if it was just held hostage by a group of criminals who let the dinosaurs out, and Jeff Goldblum is like, dang, I guess I was wrong, this park full of dinosaurs would be awesome. It's too bad these ne'er-do-wells are here, and they're here to cause trouble and let the dinosaurs out. Oh heavens, yes, that would make for an interesting conflict. Yeah, great job, Mr. Child. You've really managed to create the most fantastical, incredible wonderland under the sun. It's Utopia, and none of the laws of business practice or business operation or anything apply to it. Brilliant. So I guess that's all I really have to say about this book. It's kind of just like a pulpy, fun drivel that, yeah, you'll have fun reading it probably. I mean, if, it's not that problematic. I know I said there was some racist stuff, but I don't know, it's not that racist. It just doesn't really understand what would make an amusement park operate. And I mean, none of the characters are that interesting. The setting isn't that interesting. It could be interesting, but it's not. And, I mean, this is just the kind of book that I guess is just kind of popular entertainment. It's not high art. It doesn't try to do anything spectacular. It just says, here you go, I made up a fake amusement park and filled it in with a bunch of fake shit. Go wild, have fun, just check it out, just be there, man, just take out your brain, just give yourself a full-on lobotomy, just set your mind aside for a second, just plop that over there and just get, just have fun. It's just a fun amusement park. It's just fun rides and shit. Just don't worry about it. Just read it. So in that regard, would I recommend reading Utopia? Yeah, probably. It's a pretty funny book in that it tries to be all intense, but it's like a book about terrorists holding an entire amusement park with thousands of people hostage, but you don't really care about any of the characters because they're so one-note and bland, and we don't learn anything about them, like, at all, really. And there's no expansion or detail or anything, but you can read this book in two ways, really, and while reading it I alternated between the two. You can read it to make fun of it because it's a ridiculous book at its core, and let's not forget it has a robot dog named Flipping Wingnut. But on the other hand, you can read it just like, turn your brain off. I'm not so good at that. I like reading books that are smart and fun, but if you can just read a book that's fun and just turn your brain off and not worry about, this character sucks or this doesn't make any sense, then, whatever. You can enjoy it. And I'm sure that's Mr. Child's intention, because seriously, he just seems to have so much fun creating this magical wonderland of fun and adventure that is just not like any theme park you've ever seen before. This is the most realistic and fun theme park on Earth because I said so, and I'm the author, and I can just will anything into being, and no lawsuits. Yeah, 27 people die. Nobody gets sued. It's fine. Park continues on as normal. It gets no bad press, and the main characters who directly contribute to this toxic capitalist environment keep on cruising right on by, man, because it's Utopia, and it's the best amusement park. Fun and frolic for all. So yes, I would recommend this book. I think it's underrated. I think it deserves more than one Wikipedia article, or a stub at the very least. The Wikipedia article should be, expanded a little, because it is kind of an interesting book, and that it's very 2002-ish, and it's just an interesting book. It tries to make some statements on society like a Michael Crichton novel, but ultimately the statements on society it makes are mostly, paratextual, because I think Mr. Child is just kind of a child when it comes to understanding nuance or subtlety or development or, cohesion or the things that make reading a novel worth reading. But there is a conflict, and there is a plot, and there are characters, and there is a setting, so I guess that's really all you need to make a novel work. They don't need to be amazing or anything. Anyway, that's my review of Utopia. Not exactly the best of the best of the best, Definitely won't satisfy any fans of sci-fi, which is what I thought this was when I picked it up, but it's really not that provocative. It just says, here's a hologram, but those weren't around in 2002, and they're still not around, and, you know, I guess it's nice to have the power of imagination like Lincoln Child. And even if you're not that descriptive and you're not that elaborate and you don't really describe anything to the reader, at least the imaginary world going on in his head must be an absolute blast. And I hope he has fun there. Anywho, that's going to do it for this review. If you liked what you saw, then smash that button, smash that button, smash all the buttons, get those buttons smashed, and write to Nicholas Acada, 1424 Columbine Street, number 1, Denver, Colorado, 80206, if you want some Nicholas comics. I'm ready to sell some comics up in this pizzazz. They're the best comics under the sun, can't be beat. You're going to enjoy them. They're a real treat. And with that, that's going to do it for this review. Sayonara, suckers.